Today we are going to talk about addiction, about shame, about being shamed, and about self acceptance and how this influences other generations as well. So, let me introduce the two ladies here with me. That's Anna. Hello, Anna. You want to share a
Hi.
little bit about yourself?
Sure. I run a business called SugarX Global, and we deal with sugar addiction. And the way I got into that was I'm a recovering addict, and I just recently celebrated 35 years clean. And the first time I tried to get clean, I was 17 years old, and I'm from San Francisco, and so drugs were a big part of the culture growing up. And I thought I was a drug addict. Now today I know I'm an addict and sugar is the gateway drug. And when I had that realization, and I had the realization that addiction is one disease with many outlets, but early and chronic exposure to sugars can really wreak havoc on the developing brain, and that addiction is a brain disease, and it's a disease, not a decision. Nobody thinks I want to be an addict. So I started to see how I switched from sugar over to drugs and then back to sugar when I got off of the drugs. That's part of my story. And I never felt as free as I feel now until I put it all together. So I think that addiction is something that we think of as like you have to be Skid Row on the street, this and that. And when it comes to sugar addiction, you don't, but you can feel like Skid Row on the inside, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you can explain a lot about it later on. First, we're going to go to Laura. So, Laura, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am Laura Hanson. I am a certified high performance coach, and I work with police officers specifically in helping them work the job that's very stressful while also having positive outcomes in their lives and getting away from things or coping mechanisms really just to make it through the job, to be able to make it through a 20 plus year career. For me, I spent about 8 years on the job in Virginia Beach, and I was turning to alcohol as a coping mechanism for me. And also, as Anna's going to talk a lot about today, and I can't wait to learn more about, is the sugar component, not just sugar, but caffeine as well, and really needing some other substance in order just to get by. And that's not just, you know, getting by to make things easier and less stressful, but just to keep you going when you're in that fast paced environment. And so I'd love to be a part of this conversation because as a police officer, when we would use the word addicts, we're usually thinking about things that are controlled substances or illegal. And we can bring a lot of that self shame onto ourselves when we realize that we're dependent on some type of substance to get us through the day. But that's the root of what addiction is. And so I love being here, part of this conversation, and I'm excited to learn so much from Anna on this topic today.
Well, thank you so much for explaining this. So, the three of us are all CHPC coaches, which means that we use a certain framework which is taught by a guy called Brendan Burchard. Very funny guy, does a lot of research. And that's how we met. And yesterday we got to talk about our why. So, why we want to leave our legacy and what that means to us, what the emotions are behind what we want to do. So, for me, I want to leave a legacy where people learn to speak up, speak out, share their story, be respected, be valued. And also the other way around, that other people actually take the time out to understand people and not think like, oh, I've said it once, then they need to understand it. So I work with a lot of neurodivergent people, but also with former addicts and actually current addicts as a coach. And when we were talking, I was like, oh my God, this is so interesting. And we were just sort of brainstorming together, and it was, people need to hear our story. So I said, well, ladies, what do you think? Shall we go live tomorrow? And they said, yes, let's go do it. So it's going to be sort of like an open discussion. But I want to start with one sentence that struck me, and it was said by Laura. So you said if God doesn't condemn me, well, you said it in a different way, then why should I be judged by others? So can you explain a little bit about why you said so? And please do it in your own words. And
Yeah, of course.
how this is related to all the shaming and the addiction.
Yeah, well, see, I didn't grow up with God in my life. God was there, but I wasn't there, part of the relationship, and so this has become something new for me in my early 30s. And when I don't think of it like you said. You use the word condemned, and I think of it more as grace, as God's having this grace for me. And when I came across that word and that concept, it was so freeing, but also very humbling to realize that I came face to face with God loves me no matter what I've done in my life. And I know my personal history. So it was also like an awakening that God also knows all of my personal history. And that was very enlightening, because there's not a single person in this world that has been there step by step with me along this whole entire way. So for me to realize God's been there for everything, and in my head, and hearing my thoughts and knowing my heart and my intentions, and God still loves me, even though all that stuff that I might not want to show, like, that's huge for me. And so when I think about how God can love me and accept me and give me grace, which is that forgiveness and that acceptance, then to me, before it even got to other people judging me, it was, I need to stop being so hard and judging myself, because who am I to say I don't deserve love if God has seen everything that I've done and says you do deserve love? Like, I'm not going to tell God you're wrong. Actually, I don't deserve love. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so I'll share straight away. I am deconverted, but that doesn't mean that I don't agree with the importance of giving ourselves grace, and with the importance of the self-acceptance. So, but I do understand where you're coming from. I grew up going to church every Sunday, so yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I believe that topic of grace and self-acceptance and not judging ourselves is so important. But I still love how you said it. If God is willing to give me grace, then why wouldn't others do so as well? So Anna, please pitch in.
Well, I would say that I have a similar experience to Laura. I knew, like, I heard people talking about God, and growing up in San Francisco, I was exposed to a multitude of religions. I grew up with people from India who were Hindu, and I grew up with, Buddhists, and I grew up with Jews and whatever, but we didn't have any faith. We didn't have anything that we participated in. We celebrated Christmas like secular people do or whatever. And it wasn't, until probably my early 40s that I really kind of converted over to this idea of God as love. And I don't know, I just love the idea of there's kind of room for everyone in this idea of grace and love. And I really loved what you said, Lexi. I loved what you said, that I deconverted. However, we can come together on this. And I think that that's so important. And I think it's very important to making the world a better place, seeing what we have in common, not seeing our differences. I think that's a huge theme in recovery. To live and let live is a saying that a lot of 12-step programs use. And I believe it was first said by AA, by Bill W., who was the founder of AA. And I think that thinking about living and let live and let live, like, I don't have to live the way you live. You don't have to live the way I live, but we can live together in some kind of unity and some kind of, beautiful way. And so I really think that high performance coaching lends itself to the recovery process, period, whatever you're recovering from, right? Whether you're recovering from, like you said, feeling unheard and being able to stand up and speak your truth and be who you are and be authentic as a human being, and being able to find a tribe of people that accept you just the way you are, that is grace. And so I think that that's a high performance value, period, whether you're an addict or not. I think that that's a value that we should share. And the word judgment is a funny word, isn't it? Because we can be judgmental, which means, I could say, oh, I don't know what that thing Lexi is holding in her little cartoon there. I don't know if I like it. I could sit there and make all these judgments about that cartoon picture, right? Or I can use good judgment, which is what I prefer. I say you have to make judgments all day long. If I'm going to cross the street, I'm going to look both ways. And I think knowing the difference is very freeing, right? I don't have to care what color somebody's hair is, what color their skin is, how much money they have, this and that. But I can make judgments. Are they a safe person for me to be around or not? Those kinds of things I need to have some good judgment about. So I think that's more about boundaries. But you can still have grace. And I always believe that people can change. Like as an addict, I know there's probably some people that have been in my life and in my past, like for instance, my ex-husband, he didn't want to stop using, right? And so was I to stay with him and raise 2 kids with him? I don't think so, So I set that boundary, and it was really hard because addiction makes you think you're addicted to the misery, you're addicted to the story, you're addicted to the way things are, and to change is really hard. And I think that has to do with our primal brain and our sense of tribe, and whether we feel like we have a tribe or belonging, and hopelessness and that kind of thing. So grace is one of those things that can help people overcome hopelessness. And, my ex-husband passed away a couple of years ago, and he was still sick from the disease of addiction, but he wasn't a bad person. And I learned to detach from all of that and see the places where we could agree, and the places where he was a good father to my children to the best of his ability. And I was able to not live in bitterness, through my divorce and everything because of that. And so I think that there's a lot of freedom in real recovery. There's a lot of freedom in it.
I think you make a really good point about when you said he's not a bad person, because that's like the first place that so many of our minds tend to go. It reminds me of being a kid, and drugs are bad, and then as a kid you're like, okay, drugs are bad, therefore people who do drugs are bad. Like, I don't know, you do the simple math and it doesn't add up. But when I moved into law enforcement, and you're told, okay, well, this is what's allowed, this is what's not allowed, and so you're taking people to jail, and it's again just these associations that are happening in our minds of, okay, this thing is bad, but it gets attached to the person. That's where the label comes from. And then, next thing you know, when we see those similarities between what we're doing and somebody else is doing, that's when that self-shame comes in, because that's when we say, okay, I know I'm not supposed to be doing this. This is bad. And so therefore I am bad for doing it. And that's where as we know, when it's the I am attached to something, that's where that shame comes in. And Anna, I know you were talking a lot about this yesterday in our conversation, but more about people don't want to go and ask for help when they have shame about what it is that they're doing. And it all comes back to just how you label it in the first place, right? But if you're emphasizing, look, you're not a bad person because this happened. That was your decision. That was your coping mechanism for something. As we say in coaching, there's a reason, payoff.
Yeah, it wasn't even your decision. Your choice is literally taken away from you in addiction. Most people want to stop using. I can tell you honestly, my ex-husband tried to stop using. He tried so many times. I lost a cousin a couple of years ago. He was in a 3-quarter way house and died of a fentanyl overdose. He was not in the 3-quarter way house because he was forced to be there. He was there of his own volition. He wanted to stop using. It's because your brain's reward center has been hijacked, and you actually downregulate your dopamine receptors. So it's like when your dopamine squirts out, when you get high, your receptors are saying, the boy who cried wolf, we don't want any, we don't believe you anymore, right? If your brain is trying to have equilibrium or homeostasis, it's biochemical. There's nothing you can do about it. You're not supposed to have too much or too little of anything. And in addiction, you get too much, and it quits working. It
Yeah,
stops
that's true.
working. And so you're not even using to really get high anymore. In truth, an addict is, and you can read Anna Lemke's book, Dopamine Nation, which is a great read, by the way. And she's an amazing woman, but she explains it that when you increase the pleasure, what goes up has to come down, and pain and pleasure are both in the dopamine reward center. And so when the pain goes up, you can't tolerate the withdrawal. You're just trying to feel normal. You can't even feel good. You can't feel whole. You can't, it feels like you can't function. It feels like your whole world is going to fall apart. And so you give in, and there's no white knuckling it, because until you admit that you're powerless over your addiction, which is the obsession and compulsion you use caused by the biochemistry in your body and your brain, right? Then you can't stop. You don't realize you have a choice. But when you realize, okay, if I do this, this is going to continue to get worse. My disease is going to continue to progress. And if I find people to help me make it through the next day, make it to the next meeting, for instance, like a lot of 12-step programs will say, don't use between meetings, right? Or just for today, you can do anything until bedtime. And so they cheerlead each other, and they insist you can do it. When you get involved in the right kind of recovery group, you're going to find people that believe in you because they've gone through it. And I think
I love the concept of sponsors too, helping one another out when people have a difficult situation. So getting back to what you said, so instead of actually getting a high, you get a normal because of the dysregulation. I also believe that, and you actually said something about that, Anna, that a lot is related to mindset. So how do you grow up? How have you grown up? In which environment? What were you told? And when you see other people, how they deal with their pain and what they've been said. So when we talk about shaming ourselves, a lot of it also has to do with what we have been told growing up. And at some point, maybe our parents said it, maybe teachers said it, maybe kids said it. We start repeating it ourselves over and over and over again. And when something happens which triggers that pain, then we want to numb that pain, and we don't know how to do it using our own thoughts. And then when somehow you get exposed to whatever it is, and you don't know how to control it, then you might go overboard, and then, oh, this is a nice thing to actually numb the pain. So I do compare it to, you want to flip the switch for a moment, just not to feel anymore, but just to be like, okay, now everything is normal. So that's when I look at things, I usually also work a lot on the mindset. So what has happened, this also is a part because I'm not only a coach, I'm also a therapist. So I do a lot of stuff with hypnotherapy. But yes, it's both the environment, it's what you've heard growing up, or maybe your trauma. Of course, it can also be that something happened, that you got into the hospital, and then all of a sudden you got all this pain medication and it was too much. There are so many reasons why you can start using and do it, and it starts out so innocent, but then at some point, in order to numb the pain, you need to take more and more and more and more. Right. By the way, what I'm holding over there, and in the US, you've got armpit crutches. They are like all the way up. This is an elbow crutch. So my crutches help me to keep my freedom. So, Laura, pitch in, please.
Sure. Well, there's two things that both of you said that I want to start a conversation about. Anna, you had mentioned the obsession and the compulsion, and Lexi, you had mentioned People don't know how to control it, as in that the pull, the temptation, the need, the fix, whatever it is that you want to think about, or however you want to think about what it is when I'm in the state of lack of not having that chemical that I need, and I don't know how to control it, and also working in how the thinking is, right? We're all coaches here, so we love analyzing those thoughts. So can maybe Anna or Lexi, one of you, weigh in on what are we looking at what is that like when someone has that obsession and that compulsion to do something? Because I think that tends to be what's not addressed. And so it becomes just don't do it. Why are you doing it? Don't you have the discipline and the willpower to put the drink down? Don't you have the discipline and the willpower to just walk away and say no? And I think that leads to the shame for the person who's using or having whatever behavior that's undesired. And it doesn't really address, hey, it's not the fact that you did it. It's that I didn't know how to control that obsession, those thoughts, that compulsion. That is what is I guess the problem, so to speak. What do you guys think?
What would you advise people who say, okay, I don't know how to control it? What would be your first advice to them?
Well, I think, first of all, loss of control is a symptom of addiction, but it's also a symptom of harmful use. And you've got to know what you're treating. You can't just treat everybody like they're an addict. Like Lexi, when you were talking, there are a lot of things that are addictive that are going to soothe people, and they could use it like a pacifier, right? It's when you're, okay, so like me as an addict, I'm clean. I've been clean off of food, drugs, alcohol, everything for many, many moons. And I thought I could play a video game, right? Like a normal person. And so I got Candy Crush, and it was all I could think about. I couldn't stop my brain to save my life, to think about it. So then I started setting up rules for myself, but I didn't tell anybody that I felt like it was all I could think about. So I started setting up rules, and this is something that addicts will commonly do. And then I set up rules for myself. I'll take the app off my phone, and I'll only have the app when I'm on vacation. And my whole vacation would be consumed by thinking about playing Candy Crush, getting to the next level. I would spend some money on it and not tell my husband, because you could play longer if you pay to play, right? So it was almost like a gambling thing was happening. I didn't want to tell my husband because I was ashamed of myself for doing it, but I didn't want to not do it because I had to do it. I had to get to the next level, right? This isn't normal behavior. So I realized, okay, so I can't do Candy Crush. So I thought, well, maybe a decorating game. I mean, you can see my house. I like color. I like decorating. I like playing with stuff. Well, decorating games have rewards built into them too. These people spend millions of dollars to design games to be addictive. And so if it's known to be an addictive outlet, even if it's a process addiction like video games, porn, gambling, whatever, we know these things are designed to be addictive. Shopping, on Amazon, all of these things are designed to be addictive. So for an addict to navigate the world, it's not just one outlet. It's not just the sugar. It's not just the drugs. It's that now you have this addiction. You have this part of your brain that you can't unwire your brain. You can learn to ride a new bike, but I promise you, if you guys know how to ride a bike, you're not going to forget how. If someone sat you on a bike.
I know. I do ride them daily.
Yeah. So I mean, and you brush your teeth. And so the thing is, what you've done repeatedly over and over again, you're going to always know how to do. So addiction is always there to rear its ugly head, right? And take over your life. Or you can start paying attention to creating the life that you want to live, right? And choosing to get dopamine drips is what one of my members in my community calls them. And that might be the cold at the end of the shower for someone, because that does give you a dopamine reward, right? The shivering and everything, and it increases your dopamine because now your dopamine reward center is kind of broken. And Brendan talks about the messy middle, doesn't he? And sometimes, you go through anhedonia before you can get your dopamine reward center back on track. So you have an inability to feel good. And if you're all by yourself and you don't have cheerleaders in your life telling you you can do this, or telling you, hey, look how far you've come, you might not notice on your own. So community is hugely important. I cannot stress enough how important community is for a recovering person, because an addict alone is in bad company, and you can't read the label on your own jar. If you're inside the jar, you can't read your own label. And so you might not know that you're headed for disaster, and someone else might be able to pick it up, or they'll say something and you're like, oh man, that's what's going on with me. That identification process is hugely important. And you won't find a credible person talking about recovery that says you can do it on your own. If someone says that to you, they're wrong, and run the other way.
Well, I love what you said about the whole gaming. I know I've got ADHD with the emphasis on the H. So I know everything about hyperfocus. And I literally, what you said, had to learn to set rules for myself. Okay, I can play this game, but first I'm going to this, that, and the other. And then I'm allowed to do so. So yeah, that sounds really familiar. But Laura, getting back to the control part, what we've heard what Anna said. Most importantly, what stuck with me is, if someone says you don't need support, run the other way, because we do. What would you say to someone in order to gain that control again?
Yeah, I was the person who wanted to always figure out how to do things on my own. It was just maybe conditioning the way I figured out life. So I was very resistant to community, but I can't agree more than, I'm all in with what Anna's saying about how important that community is, because, it's the thinking that's going to drive you, either further into your addiction or further into shame when you're alone and you're trying to do that on your own. But the tricky part for me has been, okay, well, who do I turn to in community? Because if it's somebody that, okay, for example, I wanted to stop drinking completely, and I was dating somebody who was not on board with that. And so the very first day when I said, I don't want to drink anymore, we end up at the bar and she says, let's just have one. So it's like you can look for support with people, you can like people, but they can also not be supportive of you, right? So it doesn't count when you have somebody that says, I'm cheering you on, and they're going to sit there and drink in front of you. It just makes things harder for you. So finding that community is part of that vulnerable process. And to me, that's more of the discipline. It's not the discipline to not use or to not do. It's more of, I already have a plan. I will find somebody to talk to, and I'm going to connect with them, and I'm going to tell them exactly what's going on. I think that's where the discipline or the willpower comes in. It's not in whether or not you can use and not, or have the ability to pull back and stop yourself. It's, am I going to be somebody who reaches out and does something about this and admits, this is a little bit too much for me on my own.
Yeah,
right.
I'm not alone, basically.
What am I going to do to protect my abstinence today? So for me, I'm abstinent from games. I can play, what I do? I do puzzles, and they have to be really hard. Like, they almost have to be, shades of the same color, because I get hyper focused too. And if they're too easy and I think I could get another piece, I will be there all day till that puzzle is done. And so for me, it has to be, I've even learned, like, it has to be hard, and it's really enjoyable for me that way. It doesn't rob me of my dignity and make me feel like a loser. And it doesn't make me feel obsessive and compulsive. It makes me feel like, wow, that was really hard to find that one piece, and I did it. And I set a timer. I'll set a timer for like 15 minutes to work on my puzzle. And it gives my brain a little break, and it's just a good little mental thing. And if I don't get a piece, I'm not mad or anything. And if I get a piece, I know it took me a lot of time to get that piece because I chose a very hard puzzle. But that's part of the delayed gratification that people need. And what Laura said was so damn true. I couldn't have said it better myself. And it's about what am I going to do to protect this way of life that I want to have and not get robbed by this obsession and compulsion today? What am I willing to do today? What's my battle plan? You know, because you're at war with between your ears. And when it comes to, I really empathized with that, you know, well, let's just have one drink. Like, you were kidding, right? You don't really want to quit drinking, right? And when it comes to sugar, it's even harder. Because people, if they really believe you're an alcoholic, most people aren't going to want you to take a drink because they actually kind of know what that means. But with food, you have to eat. And I've known people that have had 4 teenagers at home that were already trained to eat all the junk food, and they weren't going to change because their mom needed to get her life back. And she was able, with outside support, to be able to maintain what now has turned into over 3 years of abstinence from processed foods, sugars, grains, and industrial seed oils. I mean, she's doing fantastic. And just her having that experience, she can help someone else say, oh, yes, you can do it. If I could do it, you could do it. She had signs around her kitchen. She had a cabinet of just her food. She told her kids, hey, you can't keep that stuff on the counter, please move it. You know, and at times she had to, and she had to cook the food for her family. You know, and one of my coworkers, Judy, she used to wear a mask way before COVID when she was preparing Not My Food, we call it, for her family, right? She'd wear the mask so she wouldn't take any BLTSs, which is bites, licks, tastes, or sips. Because one little taste of something, I mean, I one time got a seasoning and I put it on my fish, and I was very careful to read it because I have celiac. I have to make sure there's no gluten containing things. And I missed a teeny tiny little microscopic label, you know, and it had sugar in it. I didn't know it until I took my first bite of fish, and I could feel the little hairs on the back of my neck standing up. That's how sensitive I am to it. I took one more bite and I was like, no, you know, and I took out my iPhone, I took a picture of the label and I blew it up, and sure enough, sugar. And I learned my lesson. If it's small to read, take a picture with your iPhone, blow it up so you can read it, right? And so I learned a valuable lesson. That wasn't a relapse. That was just, I hit a little landmine, right? I mean, you know, you have to, it's, different people are going to have different levels of abstinence. But for me, I have to have complete abstinence from sugars, flours, grains, and seed oils. And that's what all the crap is made out of. They're toxic to your mitochondria anyway, and to your brain health.
Yeah,
I like what you said about the family and having the mom where she's in this environment at home, already addicted to something that, you know, I've struggled with food as well, because you can't just cut out food. It's part, you have to eat, right? So it's way harder, especially when there's a culture built around it as well. But what I love the most about that, and the sharing of the story and her being an inspiration for other people, is that I know for me personally, when I know what other people are doing, instead of shaming myself by saying, well, I'm not able to be as strong as she is. Instead, I'm like, you know what? She can do it. And it calls me into a place of higher action, or a place to strive to. So that way it's not that I'm, oh man, I'm not where she is yet. It's like, I can get there one day. It becomes a physical, tangible place, an objective for me to get to. And I can just see. And so I love when people are willing to share their journeys and their struggles. And then I'm sure she has plenty of stories of how hard it was and how many times she made mistakes and failed along the way while she was doing it. And that is the humanity of it.
Yeah, her story is really great though. She admitted she was powerless. She fully knew, I have addiction and there is no safe amount for me. And every day she recommitted to that. And she has not slid back at all. And sometimes people never use ever again, just for today. Sometimes that happens. You know, I know a couple of other people that have been able to do that, even with food, right? I know one woman who, I mean, she was about ready to be put on insulin, and she was literally raised over her family owned, they call them sweet shops in England, owned a sweet shop. They lived over it. You know, her grandparents owned a bar. Like, addiction was so big in her family, and she
celebrated.
I mean, she grew up with so much shame and guilt and being the chubby kid and being this and that, and she listened to our first 5-day challenge over 3 years ago, and she's been clean ever since, off of everything. Not one more sip of alcohol, because we say you have to get off all psychoactive substances in order to recover, because your brain is a whore. Your brain doesn't really care where it gets its next fix, right? It's gonna, if your brain, if you make up your mind, well, this isn't a problem for me, only this substance was a problem for me, that next substance will become a problem to you. It's a matter of time. Or that next outlet, like with games with me. I didn't know that was going to happen. There was no such thing as a handheld video game when I was, first clean. You didn't have iPhones. You didn't have 24/7 Amazon shopping. So there's always something new that they're going to market to you. And they're going to say, how do we get them to want this bad? I tell my people, I literally say, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, but if you don't use social media, don't follow us. Like, don't follow us. And unfollow, if you're on social media, unfollow stuff that you don't need to be looking at.
Yeah, I agree. So I want to get back into that part of shaming and feeling guilty. So I remember that one day I was walking, I think it was in Phoenix, and I came across some homeless people. So I stopped, we got to talk, and one of the things they actually said was, we used to have a job, we used to have a car, then my car broke down, I couldn't get to my job, I got fired, didn't have any money anymore. And that's how they got addicted. So I actually invited him to have lunch with me. So that's when he came to share it. And what struck me most about all of it is, here is someone who used to live his life, not a worry in the world, and then all those things happened, and lack of support, and I was like, oh my God, how are you going to get out of this again? So that part of feeling shamed, like, how could I get to this place? But also how people look at you. So yesterday we talked about stigma, and we also talked about the effect on children who have parents who are addicted. They're taken away, taken to foster place, and how to talk about it. So I want to ask Laura, I assume that you must have some experience with all of this. So can you share a little bit about what you have experienced?
Well, for me, so much of my experience, I go straight to law enforcement, because I have spoken to so many homeless people in that setting, of people who started off, either whether they were homeless or not, they start off with a car accident, and that car accident gets them on pain pills. And then their pain pills run out, and then they go to the next place that they can get it, which is heroin. So now here I have somebody in front of me who is early on into her heroin addiction, and I'm arresting her, and we're just kind of looking at each other as two human beings, like, what's going on here? And she's like, I didn't want my life to be like this. Like, I am actually so embarrassed that I'm being arrested right now for a heroin addiction, when this is just because of a car accident that happened. And so, I pull all this back into the grace element, because we shame ourselves so hard. How could I get homeless? How could I get addicted to drugs? And then you think your life is over. And I see, I don't know, I see how people normalize it to, this is just how it is, or this is just who I am now. And the identity gets so wrapped around it without being able to zoom back out and say, something bigger is happening here. And it's just like, there's still recovery ahead of you. There's still ways to get out of it. It's going to take work, but that's still an open road. If you're still alive, if you're still breathing, from where I'm coming from with my faith, God's not done with you yet. But
That's
even if
right.
you're not coming from a religious point, if you're still here, you're still breathing, there's still a way. So I always return back to whatever circumstance you're in right now, or however you were raised, or however long you've been in that habit or that way. It's just a matter of, is this it for me, or am I going to get around different people that are going to help me do things a little bit differently? And it's not hard. I mean, it's not easy. it's hard to be able to even say, I'm going to do things differently. Just the saying of it.
Yeah, and that's why the why is so important. That's how we actually got to talk about all of this. So I always get back to the why, as in, but what do you want to change, and why do you want to change it? And if you literally get back, then you also get back to those first mindsets. I remember being at Tony Robbins, and he had this Dickens process. So he actually did the why. So we were in a dark place. We were not allowed to leave. And he wanted us to get back to really literally that first moment. And for me, actually, it sounds so, well, unimportant. My big brother, who was the oldest one, was the one who was always accurate, punctual, and he had good grades, so he was the one they could count on, and he did things quickly, but it was visible. And then there was me. I'm the youngest one, and well, then there was my sister. So my sister always needed a little bit more time, and what my mom didn't know was I did my homework during class. But being someone who sometimes misses things, being a visual thinker, it's like a word in singular or multiple. I see the beginning of the word, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, that's it. And then, well, that's not what it is. So, I would sort of be trapped. And then, of course, the ADHD, the hyperfocus didn't work either. So what I basically heard, and I'm pretty sure my sister heard it too, was I'm not good enough. And that got repeated over and over and over again. So during the Dickens process, we were forced to see what would happen if our worst nightmare would come true. So for me, not being good enough would actually end up like, okay, so here I am, I'm the coach, but I'm not good enough, so I don't earn enough money. And when I don't, I look like a mess. I cannot paint my hair blue anymore. I cannot have my face done. I don't have the nice clothes to wear. And how can I be an example for other people when I'm in the gutter because I'm not good enough? And when you see that in front of you, then that's basically the bottom. And at that moment, there was this switch like, oh, but that's never going to happen. I know what I want. I want to leave a legacy where people learn to speak up and be heard and understood. So something needs to change here. So he had us scream and yell and reinforce. So then we get back to the whole mindsets and everything. But yes, that's why I believe that the why you want to change is so important. So any of you?
Yeah, you hit me. Something you said in there was so powerful to me. You made me think about, okay, not being good enough. And when you've experienced that, I don't want to make a blanket statement and say everyone has always felt that way. I know I have certainly felt that way. But when I have felt that way, I'll just take ownership over it for myself rather than speaking for everyone. When I felt that way, I'm looking for where I can belong. And I've got to say that through my entire life, through all my exposure in law enforcement, and through my career through my career life, et cetera, after law enforcement, I can say that addicts are usually the most accepting people that I've ever come across, if I'm in a blanket statement, because those are the people who've been judged for their addiction or judged for something prior to their addiction. And so they are more welcoming. And so that tends to be more of a family environment, or it's just people who look at you and say, I don't care what you have going on. I'm not going to shame you for that. And so, you were talking about about not feeling good enough, and that made me think of that. But also, sometimes people who are in denial of their addiction are usually the ones that are less accepting of others because they're so unaccepting of themselves. And so that judgment that comes within gets projected outward onto other people too. And so, when you were talking about what you want and wanting to leave a legacy, I think that helps steer you. It's helped me go away from certain addictive behaviors because I think about my legacy, but that's not always something that's, once you're already involved in something, that can necessarily pull you out, but it's something that might help you, from going back in or from getting started in certain types of addiction in the first place. But it's that bigger picture of where am I trying to drive my life while I am in control of it, and trying to make your better decisions that way.
Love it. Thank you. Anna, how about you?
Well, I'm going to say I have a different perspective on addiction. Addiction happens spontaneously. I don't think you need to have trauma. You could have had a perfect childhood. I know people in my own life that knew they were loved, they were treated well, they learned how to treat people well, but they still became addicted because it's about the substance changing the brain. And it starts with early and chronic exposure to sugar, if you ask me. Sugars and starches and carbs and, processed foods that are super highly palatable and addictive. Most kids, most girls that I know in the States that have ever babysat were rummaging through the cabinets to see what goodies they could find, right? Because it's so seductive. And there were even these things called AIDS, AIDS in the 70s, and they were diet pills that tasted like chocolate caramel. And I remember eating those, and I remember my girlfriends telling me they would eat those, and we knew that they were like a stimulant. We knew they were a drug, and I would eat like, how many can I get away with and not kill myself, right? Because I had to have a fix. That wasn't about how I was raised. That wasn't about my circumstances. See, addiction can care less who you are, how much money you have, where you come from, where you were born, what color your skin is, your sexual identity, your creed, your religion, your lack of religion, none of that. Addiction doesn't care. You have a reward center that is made for survival. And if you ask me, addicts have a very highly, active reward center. And back in the day when, now we have too much comfort, not enough cave, right? Back in the day when we had to depend on our survival brain for actual real survival, I would have been prized. Oh, Anna, she's a doer. She's going to go after that food. She's going to have sex and procreate. And then she's going to celebrate, and she's going to make sure, that we have enough wood for winter so we can stay warm and this and that. Because my reward center would be going, yeah, we got to do this, because those were our rewarding activities. Now we have all this artificial, more different, better crap going around in our environment. And it's a mismatch between our environment and our brain, right? And so we were designed to do things like eat too much because winter was coming, and winter isn't coming. So we have a huge biochemical mismatch between our environment and our brain. That reward center has not changed. And so when I hear someone say, oh, they think they just got addicted, I would really love to use the sugar tool on them and assess them according to the DSM-5 and the ICD-10 to see when was your first signs of addiction. And I would almost bet money on it that it would start with sugar as the gateway drug. And so it's changes in the brain that cause the behavior, that you go against your own will and you go against your own ways, and you start to sneak, steal, lie, cheat, hide because you're ashamed. And so, like Laura said, that's where that comes from, on the inside. And your brain does this thing where it romances you. In fact, my business partner Dave made this. It's called the trigger-free triangle, and it's brilliant. And it's debate, romance, and guilt. And usually it's going to start with debate. oh, I know I shouldn't, have another piece of pie, or I know I shouldn't play another game, or I know I shouldn't have that beer with Joe tonight, but man, it's his birthday, And so the debate is, I shouldn't do this, and you shouldn't do it. And right there, it's a no. And we teach our people to recognize these voices in your head. And then the romance is, but it's his birthday tonight. You're romanticizing the thing, right? And then guilt comes. Oh my God, now I got to hide. I can't let my wife know that I had that beer because I've been sober for 6 months. You go and you pick up your 6-month key tag because you don't want to tell anybody what's going on because you feel like a big piece of doo-doo, And so these three things go hand in hand, and debate is like picking, lighting a match, and romance is seeing how close you can get the match to your fingers, and guilt is burning yourself, right? And so this person didn't want to harm themselves, but before they knew it, they were in this loop of thinking that conspired. So this is your frontal lobe that reasons, right? So to think that you can think your way out of addiction, Dr. Paul Earley, who is the head of the American Society of Addiction Medicine for many, many moons, says that addiction is the most complex illness known to men, that it literally conspires to hijack your whole entire brain, including your reasoning ability, so that your dopamine reward center cannot be in pain and get a hit. And so you think you should be able to think your way out of this, but your thinking has been wired to get that fix, and you don't even know what's happening because it's unconscious. And so you use against your own will. You're using against your own will.
Yeah, that's why a lot of addiction centers nowadays, or at least over here, they treat it on multiple levels. So there's the physical addiction, we're talking about the brain, but there's also the part where it comes to self-esteem and how we look at ourselves. And getting back to the food is an instant reward. The moment that you take a bite, you instantly feel good. That's why food is one of the hardest things to deal with. And for people who have a food addiction, they always say, food is around us. But it's true. If you want to feel good, most women start eating chocolate.
You know what? You do have a point, but the high biochemically starts when you make the decision. So we know that a dope addict, when they're like, okay, I give up, I'm going to go get high. When they're on the way to the dope man's house, they already have a sense of relief. The pain has already alleviated. It's literally, it gives you relief, and you can't reconcile, why do I feel good when I decide I'm going to use, and I feel horrible when I'm not going to. And if we don't teach people about how their brain works, they have a less of a chance of recovery, as far as I'm concerned. You guys, I have to go, but this has been amazing. And I think addiction is something, that is close to everybody's heart. And most people have been affected by it in their families, friends, workplace. It costs our country a lot of money. And children, you mentioned them. So I do want to say this, if you could do anything for anyone in the whole world, if you work at a school, if you are a foster parent, thank you, number one, for both of those things, right? Because you're working with our future. If you can just not be ashamed for that kid, like not think, oh, that's such a shame their parent got taken away. Think of it like if the parent is in treatment, the parent is in jail for whatever, that it's almost like if someone had cancer and they had to go to the hospital, right? You wouldn't be like, oh, the poor kid, they're, they must feel so bad about themselves about this or that. But if you can just be like, I heard that you're going through some stuff right now, and I want you to know there's hope that things will change, and I'm going to be thinking about you and hoping for the best for you, and you need to hold your head high because you didn't do anything wrong. I think our children need to know that. They love their parents. I've watched women be reunited with their children for 35 years. I've been sponsoring women, and I've watched those children be so happy to be with their mom again. It doesn't matter what their mom acted like. They love their parents, and they shouldn't be shamed for that. That's natural, and I've seen women that were the most horrible parents neglected their kids beyond belief become absolute amazing parents with really good skills because they overcame their addiction and they focus on growth on a daily basis, and they learn how to take suggestions and get help.
Yeah, I love that. I totally love that. Just a very, what's not related to this topic, but I need to tell you, Anna, if you stop the recording, please keep your laptop open.
Keep my what open?
Your laptop or your iPad, whatever it is.
Oh, sure,
keep it
sure. So I can just leave the studio and leave my laptop open.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks, ladies.
Thanks, Anna.
Bye.
So, Laura, I think we have to wrap up in a few minutes as well. What is the one thing that struck you the most? Maybe something that you would like to share with the viewers out there?
Just I think Anna really hit home with how you can't think your way out of it. And, you know, the first thought is how disempowering that is, because we want to be self-sufficient. We want to be able to do things on our own. And so to think that it's like our brain is betraying us and not working with us. So it's like taking away our own decision-making authority. If you can't trust your brain because your brain is simply just trying to drive towards that reward, then it takes away your own power, and nobody wants to feel that powerlessness. And it's really emphasizes, if nothing else was more loud, than how community is needed and how it's not a willpower thing. It's you need somebody else involved to help you with to guide your decision making. And you know, it's like almost like you can't trust yourself to make the decisions. And there's so much that we all have to be real about in our lives, and the things that we are going through, any type of hard time, anything that our mind gets obsessed about, gets fixated on, hyper focused on, addicted to. It's not something to do on our own. I think there's a reason why we are social beings. I think there's a reason why there's a connection, a strong connection between people. So it's imperative that we find our people that you can hand over the baton and say, look, I know I'm a smart person. I know I can work hard. I can raise a family. I can be a good spouse. I can be an awesome mom. I can go to work and I can make millions, right? But I cannot handle my brain. My brain wants this, and I need your help to help me not do that thing, right? So it's acknowledging that you can't do it all. It's acknowledging that we got to pull other people into our journey, and that's the way we get through. That's the way we set ourselves up to have the best life that we can have and get those rewards. Like Anna said, the be able to have the family, be able to have those beautiful moments with other people and live a long life and leave a legacy, like you mentioned. And in order to do that, we've got to bring others into our journey to help us along the way.
Yeah, I totally love that. I believe that support is one of the most important thing about the brain. So it's a double-edged sword. So on one hand, the brain craves because, you know, hormonal disbalance and everything. But on the other hand, the brain knows when you are going to give in anyway, because you've done it before. So the brain is like, I don't trust you. You're not going to do it. So it just pushes on because it knows you're not going to be trustworthy anyway. And that's the whole thing, that once we let ourselves down one time, then we have to teach our brain again that we can be reliable. But if we're not, then it starts eating at us. Like that example that Anna gave about the person who actually did get a drink and did still go on with, okay, you know, I'm still 6 months sober. It's going to eat at you. And then at some point, of course, the question is, can you handle it? Can you give yourself an explanation? Or is your brain going to keep on saying, you lied because you did do it, you didn't tell it, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until the craving gets bigger. So
yeah, it's so complex. There's so much here. There
yeah,
really
that's
is.
so true. So I want to finish up with something which Anna said, and which is something I totally believe into. This is not related to your status, who you are, what you look like. It can happen to stay-at-home moms and dads. It can happen to business owners as well. The change or the difference between this is that when a business owner actually gets to start using again and doesn't have control over what's going on, they can actually mess up everything. So the life of themselves, their employees, their family, within a week, maybe even earlier, especially when you have a gambling addiction. So
Wow,
is there something?
that's really heavy. That's loud. I mean, that's good stuff right there. Because it's not just your life. It's not just you as taking care of your body and whether or not you live to be 100 or die the next 5 to 10 years, right? It's not just you. There's so many other people's lives that are depending on you and need you to make the best decisions you possibly can. And so it takes a lot, but sometimes we really do have to hand over that baton and say, I'm not the best one to be making decisions right now. I got to bring someone else into this because too many people are relying on me. So I can't make the decision for the company, but I can make the decision for myself, which is to hand that baton over to somebody else right now while I go take care of myself and get better. So I don't run this company, this family, this relationship into the ground, because people care. People care. People
Yes.
love people. People want to see you succeed. They want to see you as a person succeed more so than they care about you being at the top of the business.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's why it's so important that people actually believe that they are worthy of having friends and love and support. And I think that's one of the hardest things, that when people go into a certain direction, when they don't believe they're good enough, and that keeps on growing and spiraling, well, at the moment that you have a hard time, what are you going to do? Well, you're not going to reach out to anyone because you don't believe you are worth it. So for me, I think this is not a one way to look at it. There are so many things involved. Yes, it's the chemicals. Yes, it's what we've been exposed to. Yes, it's the reward center, but it also has to do with, can we reach out to other people? Do we feel that we are supported? Do we actually feel worth reaching out to other people? So
to me, it's all about that game plan. I know we're wrapping up here, but to me, it's
yeah.
that game plan of having it ahead of time. Make a game plan when you feel good, at your best.
Yes.
So that way you're not making this decision when you're, standing in front of the ice cream store and you're looking at all the flavors of should I go in or should I not, right? You make the decision ahead of time saying, like, okay, Laura, you want to go get ice cream. You've been thinking about ice cream all week. Let's go. I'm just creating this image here, but go grab the folder and open the folder and just read it, what it says. And inside this folder, it's going to have instructions. And maybe it's the notes section in your phone. It doesn't have to literally be some object, some tangible object, but just saying, okay, this is what I want you to think about and get your mind right. And call this person, go exercise, just something to get you a game plan to follow so that you don't have to think about it. You don't have to decide. The decision's already made for you. And you've already agreed to yourself, like, I will execute this game plan. There's no option here. If you're craving ice cream, go to the folder, open it, follow the list. Afterward, revisit.
Yeah, that's a very good one. I work with a lot of worksheets which have like game plans in there. I can probably make one which is related to this, because it's like the traffic light. When it's still green, you need to think about, okay, so this is what might happen. And then when it's orange, you need to be aware of, okay, now I need to reach out to the game plan. I need to reach out for support before you get at that red light and you go all the way through. So
That's right.
thank you for that reminder. And I truly hope that when people are watching this, that they make a game plan, and otherwise I'll make sure that there's a link somewhere where people can actually get that game plan and start working on it. So thank you so very much for being here. It was a pleasure to talk to both you and Anna. So
yes, this is awesome. Thank you for facilitating this and for carrying on this conversation so we can make more of an impact with it, because I know all of us care so much about other people and we understand what that being alone looks like, and we value community so much that I really hope that the listeners have enjoyed this and understand that, hey, this idea of community is huge. It's important. Sometimes it's uncomfortable in this topic, but we all will thrive so much better when we're in community.
yeah, that's so true. So ending on that note, reach out to any of us, leave comments if there's something that you want to share or you want to know about. So if they want to reach out to you, Laura, how could they do so?
Well, they can go to my website, which is Laura G. Hanson, HANSON.com, or my Instagram handle is very similar to that, which is just Laura_G_Hanson, and follow me there. And of course, get connected. Everything gets linked up through that. So that would be an awesome way. And I hope to be able to contact and communicate with more people and join this journey of life. We're all in this human experience together, and I'd love to be a part of your life and just learn from one another.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, we'll talk soon again.